The story begins in Italy during World War I. Master Geppetto, an elderly woodcarver, lives a quiet life in a small village with his young son Carlo. Geppetto is a devoted father, and their days are filled with love and joy. Carlo is a sweet, intelligent boy who helps his father and is cherished by everyone in the village. Geppetto is also working on a large wooden crucifix for the local church, a project that both he and Carlo take pride in. One day, Geppetto and Carlo are at the church when an aerial bombing raid strikes the village. A bomb drops near the church, and Carlo is killed in the blast. Geppetto is devastated by the loss of his beloved son. He buries Carlo beside a pine tree on a hill and falls into deep despair. The years pass, and Geppetto withdraws from the world, turning to alcohol and living in sorrow. A narrator, the insect Sebastian J. Cricket, enters the story. He finds a home in the pine tree that grew beside Carlo's grave. One stormy night, Geppetto, drunk and grief-stricken, chops down the pine tree in a rage and brings it into his workshop. In a burst of desperation and longing, he begins carving a wooden boy from the tree, hoping to recreate Carlo. After finishing the puppet, he collapses from exhaustion and alcohol. Later that night, magical spirits appear. The wood sprite, a mystical being with radiant wings and multiple eyes, descends into Geppetto's workshop. She brings the wooden boy to life, naming him Pinocchio. She tells Sebastian J. Cricket that she will grant him one wish if he guides and protects Pinocchio and teaches him right from wrong. Sebastian, eager for the reward, agrees. The next morning, Pinocchio awakens, full of energy and wonder. Geppetto is shocked and terrified at first. The puppet is clumsy and curious, with no understanding of the world around him. He causes chaos in the house and even sets himself on fire, but Geppetto manages to put it out. The villagers are equally shocked when Geppetto tries to take Pinocchio to church. The townspeople view Pinocchio as an abomination, and the strict priest condemns his presence in the sacred space. Count Volpe, a traveling carnival owner with a monkey assistant named Spazzatura, notices Pinocchio and sees an opportunity to make money by turning him into a performer. Meanwhile, Podesta, the local fascist official, is intrigued by Pinocchio's potential as an indestructible soldier. Despite the chaos, Geppetto decides to send Pinocchio to school, hoping he can learn and become a real boy. Geppetto wakes up the next morning, unsure whether the previous night's events were real, but he finds Pinocchio alive and moving. Pinocchio is full of questions, energy, and a strong desire to explore. He's excited about everything, and Geppetto is still overwhelmed and confused, tries to manage the situation. Pinocchio asks why he was made and why people are afraid of him, but Geppetto struggles to explain. Despite the confusion, he decides to send Pinocchio to school. Pinocchio walks to school the next day with Sebastian J. Cricket riding inside his chest cavity, determined to keep him on the right path. On the way, Count Volpe and his monkey Spazzatura confront him. Volpe tries to lure Pinocchio with promises of fun and admiration, singing to entice him to join the carnival. Pinocchio resists at first and continues on his way. When he finally reaches school, he's turned away by the priest, who insists he's a demon and not a real boy. Frustrated and confused, Pinocchio goes back to Volpe and agrees to join the carnival. Volpe quickly puts him on stage. Pinocchio performs for a crowd, singing a chaotic and satirical song that mocks authority, even making fun of Mussolini. The audience cheers wildly, but when Mussolini himself attends a performance, things go differently. Pinocchio sings another mocking song, this time directly insulting Mussolini. Enraged, Mussolini orders the destruction of the puppet. Pinocchio is taken outside, tied to a post, and executed by firing squad. But instead of dying permanently, Pinocchio wakes up in the afterlife, a surreal, shadowy place guarded by black rabbits playing cards. They explain he can't die like a normal person because he is not a real boy. He meets Death, the sister of the wood sprite, who tells him that each time he dies, he must wait in the afterlife for a set period before returning to the world of the living, and that this waiting time will increase with each death. Pinocchio doesn't fully grasp the weight of this yet, but accepts it and returns. He wakes up again, shocking Volpe and the soldiers. Podesta arrives and is amazed by Pinocchio's immortality. He takes custody of Pinocchio, intending to train him as a soldier in the fascist youth camp. believing his indestructibility will make him the perfect weapon. Geppetto, desperate to find Pinocchio, sets off on a journey to bring him home. Meanwhile, Sebastian continues to try and guide Pinocchio's conscience, as the puppet is pulled deeper into the world of adults and war. After Podestà takes Pinocchio into custody, he brings him to a military training camp where boys are being trained for war. Podestà wants Pinocchio to become the ideal fascist soldier, obedient, fearless, and indestructible. Candlewick, Podestá's son, is already at the camp and initially sees Pinocchio as a rival. Pinocchio, however, approaches him with kindness and curiosity. Over time, the two boys begin to bond. At the camp, the boys undergo strict training. The environment is harsh, and the lessons are centered on loyalty to the state and violence. Podestà subjects the boys to cruel drills. Meanwhile, Volpe and Spazzatura, humiliated after Pinocchio's stunt with Mussolini, are furious. Volpe especially feels his opportunity slipping away and becomes obsessed with reclaiming the puppet for his own profit. Geppetto and Sebastian J. Cricket continue their search for Pinocchio. They travel across Italy, braving the wilderness and the cold. Geppetto refuses to give up, fueled by guilt and the need to make things right with the wooden boy, who now calls him father. Back at the camp, Candlewick and Pinocchio grow closer. In one training session, they are forced to play a war game where they lead rival teams. Instead of fighting, they work together and claim a tie, challenging the camp's rules. Podestà is enraged and demands Candlewick shoot Pinocchio to prove his loyalty. Candlewick refuses and turns his gun on his father. At that moment, enemy planes bomb the camp. In the chaos, Pinocchio is killed again. He returns to the underworld, where the Black Rabbits are once more playing cards. Death tells him that every time he dies, he must spend more time in the afterlife before returning. Pinocchio becomes more aware of the cost of his immortality. Meanwhile, Geppetto and Sebastian are swallowed by a giant sea creature known as the dogfish while searching near the coastline. Inside the dogfish's stomach, Geppetto finds Carlo's wooden crucifix and realizes he's not alone. Spazzatura, having turned against Volpe after being mistreated, ends up inside the sea monster too after helping Pinocchio escape. When Pinocchio returns to life again, he is reunited with Spazzatura, and together they go after Geppetto. Volpe tries to stop them, but after a struggle on a cliffside, Spazzatura rebels, and Volpe falls to his death. Pinocchio and Spazzatura leap into the sea and are swallowed by the same dogfish. Inside the belly of the beast, Pinocchio finally reunites with Geppetto and Sebastian. Overwhelmed, Geppetto hugs Pinocchio tightly, but they're still trapped inside the massive creature, and the only way out may require a dangerous plan. Inside the enormous sea monster, the dogfish, Geppetto, Sebastian J. Cricket, Pinocchio, and Spazzatura are all trapped. The interior is dark and eerie, and Geppetto explains how he and Sebastian ended up swallowed by the beast. Pinocchio, overjoyed to be reunited with Geppetto, assures him that everything will be all right, and quickly begins to think of a plan to get them all out. Pinocchio comes up with an idea. He decides to irritate the dogfish from the inside to force it to sneeze them out. He uses his body's flexibility and his wooden nature. The plan works, but as the dogfish reacts, the group is nearly flushed out in the blast of the sneeze. However, just as they're almost free, Geppetto becomes trapped on a ledge inside the dogfish's throat. Without hesitation, Pinocchio lets himself be blown back into the creature's mouth and returns to save Geppetto. With great effort and determination, he helps pull Geppetto free, but in the final moments of the escape, a sudden blast from the fire causes Pinocchio to be thrown hard against a rock. And in the afterlife, Pinocchio faces death once more. She reminds him that he still must wait longer to return, but Pinocchio begs her to let him go back immediately to save his father. Death warns that if he breaks the rules and returns early, he will no longer be immortal. He agrees, accepting that choice. The hourglass is broken and Pinocchio is sent back. Sebastian J. Cricket looks at Pinocchio's still body with sadness. He thinks of the one wish the wood sprite promised him. With deep emotion, he whispers, "I wish the boy would come back." The wood sprite answers gently, "Then your wish is granted." Pinocchio begins to return to life. They all return to home safely. After the return from the sea and their new beginning together, Pinocchio lives peacefully with Geppetto, Sebastian J. Cricket, and Spazzatura in the small cottage. The days pass and they grow close as a true family. But the passage of time becomes inevitable. Geppetto, already an old man, eventually dies of natural causes. Pinocchio, still unchanged in appearance, but now fully aware of love, loss, and mortality, gently lays Geppetto to rest beside Carlo's grave, honoring the memory of both father and son. Spazzatura grows frail over time, and Pinocchio continues to care for him as he ages. Eventually, Spazzatura dies as well. With quiet respect and care, Pinocchio places a stone over his grave. Later, Sebastian J. Cricket dies too, having lived inside Pinocchio's heart. Literally and emotionally, we see his tiny lifeless body resting within Pinocchio's wooden chest cavity, but his voice returns one final time, narrating the closing thoughts of the story from beyond. Sebastian's spirit reflects on everything that has happened, the love shared, the sacrifices made, and the lessons learned. He acknowledges that Pinocchio may never have become a real boy in the way others expected, but he did something far greater. He lived, loved, and chose others over himself. Through his choices, Pinocchio became real in the truest sense, not through magic, but through his heart. In the final scene, Pinocchio walks alone from the graves of those he loved, quietly heading toward the unknown. As Sebastian's spirit continues to speak, he reminds the audience that what happens to Pinocchio next is not important. What matters is how he lived. He tells us that in this world, we all must face death, and we all must love, and in doing so, we all become real. The film ends with Pinocchio walking off into the distance, still a wooden puppet, unchanged in form but transformed completely in spirit.